Hey everyone, Lacey here. Today's topic is about planting seeds. Not literally, that's just a snazzy title that I gave this presentation. But it's just about the basics, about some of the foundational philosophies that I have and I share about food and how to develop a really simple strategy to laying a solid foundation for real food recovery. So I call this Real Food Foundations. Again, my name is Lacey. I'm a registered dietitian. I'm your registered dietitian here at Ascension. And if anyone has any questions, any thoughts, any suggestions about the topics that I'm sharing specifically today, just have the team reach out and we can schedule a one-on-one session. All right. So, a few things to keep in mind. I think it's really helpful when we're thinking about health and improving our health and using nutrition specifically as a tool to do that. One really simple concept, and this is a little abstract for some people, but I think it makes a whole lot of sense, is to bear in mind the fact that we are all creatures of nature. And the only thing that separates us from the deer and squirrels that are right out our door is the fact that we live in climate controlled buildings, wear synthetic fiber clothes, and drive oftentimes automobiles that are gas powered. So that's not a huge difference. Just kidding. It is a huge difference. But the point here is that we have evolved from wild animals no different than those animals that are right outside our door. The difference is that the environment that we live in today and the way that these animals are living is much different. A lot of times, and in a lot of cases, in most places, the animals are still very much living in tune with nature's rhythms, with nature's cycles. And relevant to our topic today, eating nature derived food, right? So they're eating all of the things that are in season, when they're fresh, when they're in season. And so we don't see the same rates of disease in our wild animal populations as we do in ourselves. So think about that. I'm not suggesting that we all just like live off the land and, forget our modern conveniences, but I think it is really helpful to take a nod from nature and say, how can we lean into what nature's doing and the cycles and what's available and when, and allow that to make our lives a little bit easier, definitely lessen the burden of health that we're facing. And so just as a contrast, I invite you to think about if you've ever been to a zoo or, maybe watched a show or seen a movie with zoo animals, and you'll notice the stark difference in an animal that is in the wild versus an animal that's kept in a zoo, right? It's taken out of its natural environment so that its genetic makeup, just like ours, isn't really supported by the environment that it's living in a zoo with artificial lights and eating a diet that's maybe pelletized and synthetic and different than what it would be getting if it were out in nature in the wild. So just think about that. Really simple concept. I don't mean to draw these crazy conclusions and make these off the wall suggestions, but I think it's really helpful to just lay that foundation that we are creatures of nature. Our genes have evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to live on nature's principles and in nature's cycles. And our modern conveniences have carried us astray to some degree. And there's a way for us to lean more heavily on what nature has to offer. So, how do we nurture that wild animal inside of us all? Well, in my opinion, it's a process. It's a process of reclaiming what our true nature really is. It's a process of rebuilding our physical body with the right foods and the right types of movement. Also a process of, in some cases, totally rewiring our mind and how we think, what we're exposed to in terms of our senses and surroundings. And all this allows us to reawaken our spirit. And that means different things to different people. But when our body is hurting and when our minds are in other places or on other things, it's really hard to tap into sense of spirit within us and connect to what our purpose really is. So it's a matter of reconnecting all parts of ourselves with our surroundings and doing so, acknowledging the cycles and rhythms that nature provides in order for us to get there. So, another foundational piece here is that optimal health is multifaceted. I was speaking with someone earlier today, and I said, if I could take one phrase out of the modern medicine um, statements that I hear a lot, it's that, well, these problems are separate, or these are all separate problems that are not necessarily connected. Because they absolutely are. Our bodies are very delicate, very intricate, multifaceted organisms, and just like going back to that nature example, if you were to walk outside and see a spider web suspended between two trees, and you pulled at just one end of that spider web, you would see that the entire web starts to collapse, right? And I think that's how our bodies are designed as well. If we tug at one place in our physical body or mental body, then just like a spider web, all of the other systems start to get out of balance as well. The flip side to that is as we start to repair one aspect of our physical body or our mental body, then all of the other systems also start to come back online. So I say that to say that it's my belief that our body and our mind, as well as our spirit, are absolutely intertwined and connected. The other cool thing is that there are many roadmaps and many paths to establish that connection or rebuild that connection if it's been broken. So I'm going to share with you what I've learned and adopted as the 3 pillars of health, each of which I find to be very critical to a well-balanced recovery stool, if you will. So 3 legs of the recovery stool that allows us to not just feel better momentarily, but for the long haul. So the first one is body. And when we think of our physical body, this is where we think about those biochemical aspects. So our brain and the neurotransmitters that it secretes, all of our hormones that are, shuttled around our body, sending signals for our body to act in different ways. Our blood sugar responds to when we eat food or when we're hungry. Also, our digestion, both chemical as we secrete saliva and digestive juices, but also mechanical as we chew foods and our stomach churns it up. And often involves pharmacology, so medications. This involves our genes, our genetics, and how our environment washes over those genes, and our foods that we're choosing, which is a big part of what we're going to talk about today. And of course, fitness or any kind of movement and activity. So the second leg of this stool, or second pillar of health, we attribute to mind. So this is that psychosocial, emotional piece where the physical body becomes more balanced. And as the physical body becomes more balanced, then our mental body can more easily engage. So this is where we find that as we start to nourish our body in the right way, or we start to move in some sort of a regular routine fashion, that we can then start to think a little bit more clearly, or we can engage those recovery skills, or we can have a conversation or relationship with somebody with more ease. When our physical body is in a lot of pain or out of balance or not well fed, then those mental processes become a lot more challenging. And we can develop our mind through our 5 senses. So we'll talk some about taste, touch, smell, sight, and sound. These are all of the ways that we start to rehab, so to speak, our mind through the tactile, smell, touch, sound, sight environment. And then become more discerning with our mental perceptions, emotions, actions, and responses. And then that third leg of the recovery stool, the third pillar of health that I like to share with folks is that of spirit. And spirit, when we talk about it, means different things to different people. I come from studying yoga and its sister science, Ayurveda. And in yoga and Ayurveda, disease is considered a forgetting that our true nature is spirit, or this separation from ourself, our true self, or our spirit, our purpose, what we were brought here on this, put on this earth to do, and this physical body that we walk around in. So when those two things are at odds or not synced up, then we see disease start to set in. And so the undoing of disease or the repair of disease is the reconnection of our body, our mind with our spirit, according to yoga and Ayurveda. So I like that philosophy. It has helped me through my recovery. Also in the 12 steps, we see disease is called a spiritual malady. So we see that aspect brought in. Also, just noting that we're a creature of nature and being in tune with our inner compass, our inner guide. So that gut instinct or those whispers that we sometimes hear, telling us that something's not right or we should be doing this instead of that. And so what we observe in a lot of cases is that as our physical body becomes stronger and well fed and nourished, and we've got all the nutrients flowing through our veins, and our mind then comes online, we can engage more in our recovery and in our relationships and support other people as they're supporting us. These two things become stronger, then it becomes easier to hear those whispers of our spirit, of our inner guide, of our true self, our soul, our higher power, inner voice, our compass, whatever spirit means to you. That's where we start to see it seep in. All this so that we can show up and fulfill our greater purpose. So when it comes to spirit, we mentioned them as whispers or inner guides or inner compass. These whispers are always there. It's often that we just can't hear them because our body is in physical pain or just out of sorts, right? It's not, everything's not firing as we'd like it to. Or perhaps our mind is in a state of fight, flight, freeze, or flee. And so these whispers have to get louder, right? Our inner compass is just like screaming at us at this point until sometimes it shows up as a slap in the face. And that proverbial slap in the face could be a diagnosis that we get from a healthcare provider. It could be an intervention that we have with a friend or family member. It could be a criminal offense. It could just be a general wake-up call. It could be us hitting our rock bottom. But these whispers, in my opinion, and that of a lot of folks that I've worked with over the years, is that these whispers are our inner compass. It's our spirit. It's something that we're doing routinely is no longer serving us, and it's time to change course and consider a different path. So in addition to those three pillars, and I'm sure you guys are learning a lot about those and sharing and teaching each other about those pillars and beyond. I think it's important to consider that optimal health also extends beyond just our physical self, right? Or what we make up in terms of our body, or physical body, or mind, and our spirit. But it also extends to the health of the relationships that we have. So are those positive or negative, of our home life? How does that and where we live translate to how we feel and how we care for our physical body, to our families, that of our coworkers, and the work that we're physically doing, mentally doing, to the communities that we live in and the environment, the natural environment, as well as the physical environment that we inhabit. So with all of that in mind, kind of setting the foundation, I think it's helpful to come to pick one of those pillars to focus on for a moment, and think about what's one strategy that we can work on to try and start to change how we're feeling. And I always like to start with food, because food is very tangible. It's something that most of us are doing at least 3 times a day, sometimes more, maybe less. And one piece of the food aspect that I think is really important is to focusing on the quality that we're getting. And why is the quality of our food important? Well, it's because we often forget that we are creatures of nature, right? And we become creatures of habit. And it might be easier to remember the fact that we are what we eat, but we are what our food eats too. And then along with that, we aren't what we're not eating. So the quality of our food is a reflection of the quality of how we feel, right? Or how our physical body is working. So the more closely we can find the foods that look the way they did when they were growing in nature. So, say for instance, rump roast or ground beef, the whole real piece of meat that came right from the animal is going to serve us better than the beef canned sausage product that was on a shelf and packaged several months, if not years before. So thinking of food in the context of the closer that it is to its natural form, the more nutrition, the more nutrients, the more quality we're going to extract from that food, and better we're going to feel in our physical body. So some other food philosophies that I think are really helpful to bear in mind, and again, I want to keep this as simple as possible, is that all diets can work. So I'm not a fan of that four-letter word diet, but I do think that any food philosophy or food approach, whether someone wants to be a raw vegan or totally carnivorous paleo keto person and only eat meat, like I think there's room for that. I don't see that there's a one size fits all solution. I think that all foods can fit. And in terms of food quality, I think there's a spectrum. So I also don't think that we all just need to forage like wild animals eating mushrooms and acorns all day. But I think there's merit to eating some of those foods. There's also merit to eating some of the modern convenience foods as well, like ice creams and pizzas and whatever is available to us. But thinking of food on a spectrum so that we're not eating any one food exclusively and we're not shunning any one food exclusively, but we're leaning into the foods that we know serve us the most and being more aware of the foods that maybe are taking away from our health or not providing the energy, the stability, the groundedness, the fullness, the satiety that a real food could. So having said that, I think there's an intersection here. So we know food affects our physical body. We see that we eat foods. We start to maybe gain a little bit of weight, or we eat less food. Maybe we start to lose a little bit of weight. We can change and manipulate our blood pressure and our blood sugar and our cholesterol levels, all by adjusting the food. So we see that physically in our physical body. But there's also a relationship to food in our mental body or our mind, and we call that food and mood. And when we think of foods on a spectrum, again, there are foods that can be overly stimulating if we have too much. So think sugar or coffee, hyperactivity. And then there can be foods that are very balancing. And I think of most whole, real foods kind of falling into that category. And then foods that can be kind of depressing. So this is when we eat something really heavy or we've eaten too much, even we eat things that are overly processed and just kind of zap us of our life force, of our energy. So these foods are kind of on a spectrum, and it's a matter of noticing when we're having these feelings and then reflecting back to what foods maybe help to contribute to those. So thinking of food and its ability to affect our mood. So we know that food influences our mood through our sense gates. And so we want to be sensible about our food choices. Some examples here of a food and mood direct relationship are sugar and hyperactivity. We can see that in ourselves, or most notably, I think most people think of it in children bouncing off the walls at a birthday party, or overeating. Thanksgiving dinner, you just had too much and all you want to do is lay around. So that making us really lethargic. Maybe not eating. If you've ever skipped a meal or known someone who is late for dinner and they get kind of hangry, or coffee, similar drinks and being kind of jittery or wired, heart racing. And maybe you can think of some others. You can chat amongst yourselves, maybe jot them down in your journal, some relationships that you've noticed between certain foods or drinks that you consume, and then how that makes you feel, either for the positive or negative, or maybe, even keel, balanced out. So just noting here that food does affect our mood. Um, and it can also affect our food choices. So that that our food affects our mood, but then also that our mood can affect our food choices. So that if we're feeling certain emotions like sadness, that we might have a tendency to overeat or undereat, depending on our personality or tendencies. Or if we're celebrating, we might have that tendency to treat ourselves with a certain food or an amount of food. So, noticing that the relationship is bidirectional, our mood can certainly affect our food choices, just as our food can affect how we feel. So, the interface of food and mood is our brain. So, we're getting to a conclusion here. I'm going to take you somewhere and give you some tangible take home, practical knowledge that you can start putting into practice today to hopefully help change the way that you feel and change the way you look at food. So, the brain, this physical aspect of our body that's held inside of our skull, is the interface between our mind and our physical body, the rest of our body. And our brain communicates via something called neurotransmitters. Some of you may know about these neurotransmitters. If this is the first you've heard of them, all you need to know is that these are the chemical messengers. These are like the mailmen of the brain to the body and from the body to the brain. And they move throughout the body and are triggered by our sense perceptions. So things that we hear and see and taste and smell and touch all send messages to the brain to act in some way, and vice versa. Our brain then can send messages to the rest of our body to do certain things based on what senses have been perceived. And these senses and these chemical messengers then manifest into the thoughts that we think, the emotions that we feel, words that we say, and even actions that take place. For instance, to eat something or not to eat something, or to make a choice to eat this thing or that. So, in the case of a starving brain, and this is a brain that hasn't eaten maybe in at least 4 hours, right? So, a starving brain is a brain that's not been fed in 3 to 4 hours, let alone multiple days, right? So, we can really deplete the brain of what it needs in order to function, and the rest of the body as well. But when it comes to the starving brain, and specifically to substance use behavioral addictions, we know that they deplete the body of these neurotransmitters. Remember, those are the chemical messengers or the mail carriers throughout the body. And as the starving brain is depleted of those ingredients to manufacture those neurotransmitters, it gets harder for us to engage in our emotions, in our thoughts, in our actions, right? So this is akin to a post office not having, and they have tons of mail to deliver, but no one's there to deliver it. So it can't send or receive signals clearly. The brain can't process the sensory inputs that are coming in accurately. It can't translate the thoughts that we're having into actions that we might even, desire to make. Could be, I've learned this new skill, I want to make it, but our brain physically can't allow us to do that because those chemical messengers, or the makeup of those chemical messengers, isn't there to transmit the signal. So then what happens? We default to our unconscious programming, or we just react without really thinking. We do something we didn't even plan to. We become impulsive. We just kind of react to the situation. And you can maybe think of other ways that you've seen someone just be kind of unconscious and react. So maybe take a moment to chat about those. You can press pause or jot them down on your notebook. So where are we going? Why is this important? Well, those neurotransmitters, those chemical messengers, are made up of something called amino acids. You don't need to memorize all of these words, but take note that amino acids are the building blocks of protein. So here we're getting into the point with food. So protein foods provide the material necessary for repleting our neurotransmitter stores. So if we want to send chemical messengers from our brain to the rest of our body to act in a way that we know is in our best interest, we have to have protein in our blood in order to do that, in our bloodstream, in our system. And where is protein found? Well, it's found in meat like beef, chicken, and pork. Also, all cuts of fish, shellfish. Eggs are a great source of protein. All of our dairy foods, whole milk, whole cheese, whole yogurt. Also, nuts and seeds like walnuts and peanuts, pecans, pistachios, you name it, peanut butter, um, lots of different nuts and seeds like flax seeds or sunflower seeds. And then also beans and legumes. So, black beans, pinto beans, kidney beans, green beans, lentils, all of these foods have are rich sources of protein. And protein is made up of these building blocks called amino acids. And these amino acids are also the building blocks of our neurotransmitters, those chemical messengers that send the signal, transmit the signal between our brain and our body and our mind. So we know we need protein. Let's talk for just a second about how much. So the average man needs somewhere between 60 to 80 grams and woman needs 40 to 60 per day. I usually tell people if you've never been paying attention to this, just shoot for 100 grams, especially if you know you haven't been getting protein every 4 hours or every meal. So 30 grams with every meal is a good rule of thumb, maybe 10 grams in every snack that you have. This is easy to find if you look on a package. Some people use books for reference guides, or there are now apps on phones and websites where you can quickly type in and look up how much protein something has. But to give you an example, 3 eggs, so if you know what 3 hard-boiled eggs might look like in your hand or how heavy that would feel, is going to give you about 20 grams. So if you can apply that same like hold in your hand mentality to any other cut of meat, you know that what you can hold in the palm of your hand in a cupped hand is going to get you somewhere between 20 to 40 grams, which is what we need to shoot for at about every time that we're having food. And how often? This is sometimes more critical than how much, is making sure that we're eating frequently enough that our brain is never going without, that we're not starving our brain. So the rule of thumb here is every 4 hours. So eat protein-rich foods every 4 hours, repleting those neurotransmitters, which then allow us to engage in the mental work that we're doing here, building these recovery skills, preventing relapse, and ultimately solving all of the world's problems. So people always like to ask me about protein supplements. I just want to pop this here for your reference. I'm a big fan of prioritizing real food first. One, it's cheaper to buy a chicken thigh or chicken leg, even if you get it from the freezer section and throw it in the oven or the crock pot. Than it is to spend your money on a protein bar or protein shake. You're gonna pay a lot more pound for pound in doing that. But I always encourage people to read the fine print. So look down, flip the package around, look at the back down at the ingredients. This is what you'll actually see that's inside the package. And if the ingredient that has protein in it is down here at the bottom, and there's a bunch of other sketchy stuff up here at the top, then it's probably not worth the purchase. So you want to look here. You want this section to be as few ingredients as possible, and knowing exactly what all of them are so that we can know how they're serving us in our body. Another thing that you can try is making your own protein supplement or protein shake by making a smoothie. This is my 60-second smoothie recipe. I usually throw a banana, a big heaping scoop of peanut butter, some Greek yogurt or whole milk, even dried milk powder if you need something shelf stable. That's inexpensive, but good quality protein. You can even, some people like to throw eggs in there, powdered eggs, liquid eggs. If you want a little extra protein, you don't have to. And then some honey or maple syrup to taste if the banana wasn't sweet enough, or any other fruit. Sometimes frozen fruit is nice to change it up. And then, of course, there's pre-made shakes and bars, but you always want to read the package and make sure what you're getting is what you're paying for is actually worth what you are getting. So I've got a quick exercise here, and there's a handout that you can use. Take this home, put it into practice. This is an exercise that gets easier as you continue to do it each day or week or month, however often you get a chance to go shopping. But I always encourage people to start with when. So make it a point to establish regular meal times. We talked a lot about in the beginning how we're nature's creatures, and nature has certain rhythms, and the moon and the sun and the seasons all change, and that's no coincidence. And so our bodies are also very sensitive to nature's rhythms of light and dark, of hot and cold, of the seasons change. And so the more we can develop a rhythm for ourselves, the more our body likes the consistency and functions a little bit more smoothly. So we sync up those biorhythms with nature. So a good rule of thumb is 3 solid meals that we carve out time to actually sit down, to enjoy the food, to chew the food, and to maybe even, if we get a chance, cultivate a sense of gratitude that we were fed today. The second step here is then to think about how. So we know when we're going to eat. Before we even consider what the food's going to be, think about how it's going to get onto our plate. So that means who's going to shop for the food, who's going to prepare the food, who's going to pack the meal if it has to be taken where I'm going, who's going to portion it out, what's it going to be packed in. Go back to that when, and then trace out your day, week, month to figure out how you might get the food when you know you're going to need it. Because most of the time what happens is we get to that 3 solid meal time on the clock, and then we start thinking about how we're going to get the food on our plate. And by then it's generally a little bit too late. We're already starting to notice those signs of hangry or sleepy or reactive or impulsive, and end up choosing something that maybe wouldn't have been as good of a choice. So this is a matter of setting ourselves up for success. And then lastly, in this meal planning made easy, we want to think about the what. So I've provided a real food recovery, what I call real food recovery list. And it's a really simple, straightforward traffic light system, so that the green light foods are all of those whole real foods that we know to be super nutrient dense, to give our body what it needs to function, to stabilize our mood based on the foods. And then as we get into the yellow and the red light foods, the ones that we know are going to be a part of our life. So we don't want to, totally shun them or forget them, but just be more aware of the fact that they're not going to give us what our body needs and wants, and probably end up leaving us high and dry and hungry or hangry in a matter of an hour or so. So it's just some food for thought, and a tool to help you prioritize where we spend our food dollars. So from this list, you can pick 3 things out to throw on your plate or in your bowl or in your bag and call that a meal. So you definitely want to prioritize a protein. And I would also do this when you're shopping. Spend your food dollar on your protein item first, and then layer on something colorful like a vegetable or a fruit, and then round out that meal with some sort of a carbohydrate like a grain or a dairy-based food. So this could be like a bread or a noodle, or some rice, or it could be, a glass of milk or some cheese or cottage cheese, yogurt. The point here is try not to overcomplicate, right? It doesn't have to be rocket science. You can make it really simple and feel really great after you have a meal. And it's easy, I think, to psych ourselves out about eating the right thing, just the right amount at just the right time and just the right portions. And then we have analysis of paralysis and don't end up choosing anything at all, or choosing something that doesn't really serve us. So in summary, there on the what, we prioritize protein as our anchor. We splash some color with produce and add some flavor with our fats, and energy with our dairy and or grain. So the take-home message in summary here is to remember we are nature's creatures. So we want to prioritize fueling our body, our mind with real whole foods as often as we can. We want to splash in some color with with plants, so fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, grains. Most importantly, we want to have protein every 4 hours to feed our starving brains, to aid in our recovery, and prevent relapse. Thanks, guys. Hope you enjoyed this. If anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm available to schedule a consult one-on-one to talk about this, any of these things, and more. So take care. Good luck.